My world is built on predictable, observable facts. A fever is a temperature. A wound has a cause. A body is a complex but ultimately logical system. I traded the chaos of a Chicago ER, the senseless, bleeding parade of human desperation, for the absolute order of remote Test Site 4. Here, deep beneath the Nevada desert, everything has a protocol. The air is recycled, the water is purified, and the sun is a series of lamps that brighten and dim on a precise 24-hour cycle. We are a self-contained organism, 117 souls sealed away from the world to pursue what they told me was the future of energy production. Officially, it's called Project Echo Point. My job is to be the facility's primary physician, the caretaker of its most fragile components, the people who run the machine at the heart of it all. The entire facility is a ring, built around a massive, multi-story spherical cavern they call the Gate Chamber. I have no idea what truly goes on in there. My clearance covers flesh and bone, not physics. But I know it consumes more power than a small city and is the reason we're all buried a mile underground. My world is the infirmary. The gate is the god's business. The man sitting on the edge of my examination table was Gary Walsh. He was a senior cryogenics technician, which was a fancy way of saying he was a high-tech plumber who managed the super-cooled helium lines for the project's core. He was in his late 40s with a kind face and hands that were permanently calloused from a lifetime of working with tools instead of theories. He was here at Site 4 for the same reason most of the non-scientific staff were. The hazard pay for an 18-month contract was enough to change a life. For Gary, it was a down payment on a house for his wife and their 12-year-old daughter. He was a good man, a straightforward man, and right now he was a problem I needed to solve. "The headaches are one thing, Doc," he said, twisting a phantom wrench in his hands. "I get 'em when the air scrubbers kick into high gear. It's the other thing. The daydream." A daydream? I made a note on the datapad. Patient reports recurring migraines. It was a common enough complaint in a sealed environment. "It's not really a dream," he clarified, his brow furrowed with the effort of trying to explain. "I'm awake. I'll be in the mess hall or in my bunk, and suddenly I'm somewhere else. I'm in Maintenance Tunnel 7C in the cryo bay. I can smell it, Doc. That sharp ozone smell of burning insulation. The lights are out and the emergency klaxon is screaming. The door's jammed shut and the heat. I can feel the heat on my face." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and earnest. I have a clear memory of pounding on that door until my knuckles were raw. I know it never happened. I checked the logs. Tunnel 7C hasn't been accessed in 3 weeks. I set the datapad down and gave him my full attention, my mind already sifting through diagnostic checklists, phantom sensory events, vivid, intrusive waking dreams, headaches. I'd seen it before, just not in a place this controlled. "Gary, how long have you been on this contract?" I asked. 10 months, 8 more to go. "And contact with your family?" "Video call every Sunday. Maddie showed me her report card yesterday, straight A's." A flicker of pride, then the worry flooded back in. "I'm not cracking up, Doc. I swear, it feels real, like it happened to me in another life or something." I offered a small clinical smile. It was a tool, just like a scalpel or a suture. "You're not cracking up. This is a high-stress, deeply unnatural environment. You're thousands of feet underground in a locked box with the same 100-odd faces every single day. We call it isolation-induced somatic response. The mind under pressure can create powerful physical and neurological symptoms. It's the brain's way of sounding an alarm." I was imposing order, taking his terrifying, unique experience and placing it neatly into a labeled box. That's what a diagnosis is. It turns the unknown into the known. "So, you're saying it's all in my head?" He sounded defeated. "I'm saying your head is creating a very real experience in response to very real stress," I corrected gently. "The burn you smell, the panic you feel, it's not a memory, it's a fabrication. A very convincing one. Think of it as a symptom, no different from a cough. We just have to treat the underlying cause. I turned to the automated medical dispenser, my back to him. I was confident in my diagnosis. The puzzle was solved. I'm prescribing a low-dose benzodiazepine. It's a mild sedative. Take 1 tablet before your sleep cycle. It will help interrupt the anxiety feedback loop that's triggering the migraines and these intrusive thoughts. And try to break your routine. Spend an hour in the recreation area. Read a book. Something to disconnect. I handed him the small vial. He looked at the pills in his palm like they were a foreign currency he didn't know how to spend. Okay, Doc, okay. He didn't sound convinced, but he was out of options. He was a plumber, and I was the doctor. He trusted the protocol. I watched him leave, the infirmary door closing behind him. Then I made the final entry in his file. Patient exhibits classic signs of ISR. Prescribed diazepam, 5 milligrams. Follow-up in 48 hours. I closed the file. The anomaly was categorized. The chaos was contained. I felt the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved, a system restored to equilibrium. For a man who had fled a world of pointless violence, there was no better feeling than that. It was the feeling of being in control. The satisfying quiet of my solved problem lasted less than 20 hours. My shift had just begun when the infirmary's private comm line chimed, a shrill sound reserved for urgent consults. I expected a call from the control room about an engineer with high blood pressure. Instead, Gary Walsh's name flashed on the screen. I accepted the call, a flicker of professional annoyance stirring in me. A panic attack, most likely. The sedative might have given him a vivid nightmare. "Dr. Reed," I said, "are you having a reaction to the medication?" The voice that came back was choked with a raw animal terror that went straight through the speaker and into the base of my skull. "Doc! Oh God, Doc, you gotta help me! It happened again!" "Calm down, Gary. What happened? The fire, the smell, but it's real this time. It's on me." Before I could respond, the line went dead. 2 seconds later, the infirmary door slammed open. It was Gary, his face bloodless and sheened with panic. He was staring down at his right forearm, cradling it against his chest like a wounded bird. He stumbled towards me, his eyes wide with a plea that went far beyond any pain I'd seen in a Chicago ER. "Look," he whispered, his voice cracking. He held out his arm. My mind, trained to observe and categorize, went into its familiar routine. Then it stopped. It simply stopped. The clinical part of my brain, the part that had seen thousands of injuries, couldn't place what it was seeing into any known category. It wasn't a simple burn. It was a work of anatomical art, a grotesque masterpiece of tissue damage. Spanning from his wrist to his elbow was a filigree of charred epidermis and weeping subcutaneous tissue, the skin split open in a pattern that looked like a Lichtenberg figure. The branching, fern-like pattern left by a high-voltage electrical discharge. The edges were precise, as if a branding iron in the shape of a lightning strike had been laid against his skin. The flesh within the pattern was a mottled ruin of grey and yellow, and the sickly sweet smell of cooked meat and vaporized protein hit me, a scent I knew all too well. But this was impossible. My mind raced, grasping for rational explanations, for a handhold on the sheer cliff face of this impossibility. A self-inflicted wound? No, the burn was too severe, too exact. He would have had to build a specialized device to do this to himself, and the pain would have been astronomical. He wasn't a masochist. He was a terrified man. An accident, then. "Stay right there," I commanded. I turned to my console, pulling up the facility's internal surveillance logs. Every corridor, every room was monitored. I filtered for Gary Walsh, Sector D, residential ring, for the last hour. The video feed appeared instantly. There he was, sitting on the edge of his bed in his small, windowless room. He was alone. He was perfectly still for several minutes, Then he suddenly seized, his whole body arching back as if hit by a cattle prod. A faint wisp of smoke curled up from his forearm. He screamed. That was it. No flash of light, no arcing electricity, no weapon. Nothing. Just a man, sitting alone in a room, who spontaneously began to burn. Gary, tell me exactly what you felt. Nothing, he cried, tears now streaming down his face. I was just sitting there, thinking about Maddie's report card, and then pain. My whole arm was on fire. He stared at the wound, his face locked in a rictus of stunned terror. It just appeared, Doc. 1 second, my arm was fine. The next, it came from nowhere. My professional composure was pulverized. My entire world, a world built on the logical progression of cause and effect, had just been turned inside out. This was a crime scene. But the perpetrator wasn't human. The perpetrator was physics. The phantom memory of burning insulation. The intrusive thought of being trapped in a fire. It wasn't a symptom anymore. It was the cause. His mind had created a real physical wound. If it could happen once, it could happen again. I had no idea what this was, which meant I had no idea if it was contagious. I stepped back, my medical training kicking in, overriding the paralysis. The protocol for an unknown pathogen was clear, absolute, and immediate. Containment. Gary, I said, my voice taking on a tone of command I hadn't used since the ER. I need you to come with me. Don't touch anything. He was too terrified to argue. I led him through the infirmary to a heavy steel-plated door at the far end. A door marked with a stark black and yellow biohazard symbol. The BL4 Isolation Suite. It was designed to contain the most virulent plagues on Earth, with its own air supply and reinforced walls. It had never been used. I typed in the access code and the door opened, revealing a small, empty room. Get inside, I said, my voice softening slightly. I'm going to help you, Gary. But first, I have to make sure this doesn't spread. He stepped across the threshold like a man stepping into his own grave. I hit the control panel, and the thick door slid shut. I spent the next hour working on Gary through the BL4 Suite's remote medical apparatus. I sat at a console outside the sealed chamber, manipulating a pair of robotic arms inside. On the screen, I watched myself debride the dead tissue from his arm, spray on a layer of silver sulfadiazine antiseptic gel, and apply a sterile dressing. My job was to stabilize the patient. All I was doing was cataloging the decay. Gary was mostly silent, his fear having subsided into a state of shock. He answered my questions with single-word responses. The burn was real. The pain was real. But his mind couldn't bridge the gap between that reality and the fact that nothing had caused it. Neither could mine. The suite was soundproof, our communication handled by a dedicated intercom. Okay, Gary, the dressing is on. I've started a painkiller drip. Just try to rest. Rest, he repeated, his voice flat and empty. Then his head snapped up. He was looking at the corner of the small white room, as if someone had just walked in. No, he whispered. No, not again. Gary, what is it? His own voice came through the speaker, strained with a new wave of panic. Don't let it. It's so hot. But then another sound bled through, layered beneath his words. It was a rasping hiss, like air being forced through damaged lungs. I frowned, tapping the console. A feedback loop? An open mic somewhere? Control, this is Dr. Reed. Run a diagnostic on the infirmary intercom system. I'm getting audio bleed through. A crisp, female voice replied instantly. Negative, Doctor. System is clean. You're on a closed channel. I looked back at the screen. Gary was now rocking back and forth on the edge of the cot. Burning, the second voice whispered through the speaker. It was weaker than his, frayed and thin. It was a voice made of static and agony. Crushed. The metal. Let me out. It wasn't feedback. It was coming from him. He was speaking with two voices, his own terrified and present, and another, an echo of some distant suffering. I was witnessing a man haunted from the inside out. Before I could process the monstrous implications of that, the main facility comm on my desk chimed. It was a priority signal from the engineering deck. I patched it through. "Doc, you there? It's Chen." His voice was tight, trying and failing to sound casual. "Weird question for you. You ever hear of someone feeling like they're falling? Like, for real? I was just on the gantry and for a second I remembered hitting the floor. I felt my legs break, Doc. But it never happened. I'm standing here." I stared at the sealed door to the BL4 suite, at the man inside who was now whimpering, two distinct streams of sound leaking from his mouth. Another chime, this one from hydroponics. I answered it. "Dr. Reed, it's Miller. Sorry to bother you, but do you smell that?" "Smell what, Miller?" "Smoke, like burning plastic. No one else smells it, but I have this memory of choking on it." It wasn't just Gary. It was a contagion spreading through the facility. And I was the only one who had seen what came next. Soon Chen would be calling me back, his legs genuinely shattered. Miller would call with burns blistering his throat. Gary's phantom fire had become real flesh and blood trauma. These new cases were just the opening notes of a symphony of horrors. I had to warn someone. I had to get to the top. I cut the comms and grabbed my datapad. On it was Gary's file, the video of his spontaneous injury, the log of his two voices. It was my only proof. I turned and walked out of the infirmary. I was heading for the facility's core, for the office of Site Director Shaw, a man who believed in protocols and predictable outcomes. I was about to present him with a problem that didn't exist in any manual, a sickness that was rewriting the laws of reality one body at a time. The control room was the facility's brain, a tiered amphitheater of monitoring stations, all focused on a wall of data displays. It was always quiet, filled with the reverent tones of men who believed they were talking to God on a spreadsheet. Site Director Shaw sat at the central command console, a man whose tailored suit seemed to repel the facility's air. To his left was Arthur Coleman, the lead physicist of Project Echo Point, his face permanently etched with the smug certainty of a man who understands the universe better than anyone else. To his right was Ben Carter, the head engineer, a practical man who trusted pipes and wiring far more than he trusted theories. And in the back, leaning against the wall near the emergency exit, was Robert Novak, the safety compliance officer. As always, he said nothing. He just watched. "Director, we have a critical medical situation." Shaw turned, his expression one of weary impatience. "Dr. Reed, is this about Technician Walsh's anxiety? I saw your report." "It's escalated beyond anxiety, sir," I said, stepping forward. I placed my datapad on the console. At 0700 this morning, Gary Walsh spontaneously manifested third-degree electrical burns across his entire right forearm. I have the video evidence here. Carter leaned forward. "Spontaneously? Sam, that's impossible. I ran a full diagnostic on the power grid. There were no surges, no shorts, nothing." "That's because the source wasn't external," I insisted. "I also have reports from two other technicians, Chen and Miller, experiencing the same initial phantom memories Walsh reported yesterday. One of a fall, the other of a fire." Coleman scoffed, a dry, academic sound. "Samuel, you're a physician, not a physicist. You're describing a classic case of shared delusion, amplified by the isolation. Stress is contagious. You can't build a diagnosis on ghost stories." "A ghost story didn't char a man's flesh," I shot back. I tapped the datapad. "This is the audio from Walsh's quarantine suite recorded 30 minutes ago." I hit play. Gary's panicked voice filled the room, but beneath it, clear as a bell in the high-fidelity speakers, was the other one. The rasping, hissing whisper. "So hot. Let me out. Crushed." The room went silent. Carter blanched, his mouth opening slightly like he wanted to deny what he'd heard. Shaw's facade cracked just enough to reveal a flicker of dread. Coleman simply crossed his arms, unmoved. Audio artifacts. Feedback from the suit's internal comms, he said, waving a dismissive hand. There's a rational physical explanation for everything. Let me see the patient. He turned to an operator. Put the live feed from the BL4 suite on the main screen. The central display resolved into a single high-definition image of Gary's isolation cell. He was sitting on the cot, rocking back and forth. He looked small and broken. "See?" Coleman said, a triumphant smirk on his face. "A man in distress, not a monster." The lights in the control room dimmed, then flared violently. On the main screen, every pixel of data around the video feed dissolved into static. The facility was having another stutter. "What's happening?" Shaw demanded. "Minor energy fluctuation from the gate containment field," Coleman said, though his eyes were glued to the screen. "It's harmless." On the screen, Gary Walsh's body convulsed. It wasn't a seizure. A seizure is a biological event, a storm in the brain. This was a violation of physics. His form became a high-speed slideshow of his own potential deaths. For one frame, he was himself. The next, he was a charred corpse, skin blackened and split, smoke rising from his chest. The next, his legs were twisted, bone jutting from his flesh. The next, he was old, a withered husk with sunken eyes, dying on the same cot decades from now. The flashes were so fast they blurred into a single continuous image of torment. A collective gasp sucked the air from the control room. The operators in the lower tiers recoiled from their consoles. Carter physically stumbled back, his hand over his mouth. Coleman stood frozen, his smug certainty replaced by a mask of chalk-white intellectual horror. The universe he understood had just been proven a lie. Shaw simply stared, his mouth hanging open, his authority and composure gone, evaporated in the face of the image on the screen. The feed returned to normal. Gary was curled on the floor of the suite, sobbing, but no one was looking at him anymore. They were looking at each other, their faces reflecting the same primal terror. The comfortable denial was shattered. The monster wasn't at the door, it was inside the house, it was wearing our faces, and we had just seen, with our own eyes, what it was capable of. In the back of the room, Robert Novak hadn't moved. He just watched us, his expression as blank as ever. But I saw him make a single tap on the small, encrypted device on his wrist. This was the moment for a leader, a moment for someone to impose order on the chaos. I waited for Shaw to issue a command, to declare a full facility lockdown, to do something. He did nothing. Into that vacuum of authority stepped Robert Novak. He pushed himself off the back wall with a quiet, unhurried motion and walked to the central console. "Director," Novak's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You are relieved of command." Shaw flinched as if struck. "What? You're a safety officer, Novak. You have no—" Novak held up his wrist, rotating the device he'd tapped earlier. Its small screen glowed, projecting a holographic seal onto the console, the official crest of the Department of Energy, but with a black, crossed scythe overlaid on it. "My title is a cover. I am Supervisor Robert Novak, Special Contingencies Division. Per protocol, Scythe, Article 1, Section A. In the event of a Class 4 biotemporal event, I am authorized to assume full operational control of this facility and all its assets." Shaw collapsed back into his chair, defeated. The authority had been claimed by a higher power he hadn't even known existed. Novak turned to the stunned operators. "Seal this room," he commanded. "No one in or out without my direct authorization. Cut all external communications. Site 4 is now on full blackout." The operators, desperate for someone to give them orders, scrambled to comply. He then turned his attention to me. His eyes were flat, like polished stones. "Dr. Reed, your quarantine of the first subject was the correct procedural step. However, your analysis is flawed. These men are not sick." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, taking a step forward. "I have 3 confirmed cases and a dead man's wound to prove they are." "You have 3 confirmed vectors," he corrected me. "They are no longer personnel, they are hosts. Their bodies have become compromised zones. From this moment on, they are a security threat, not a medical problem. They are human beings. Gary Walsh is a man with a wife and a daughter. Chen has 2 sons. They need treatment, not containment." "Your compassion is a liability, Doctor," Novak said without a flicker of emotion. "It compromises operational security. My directive is to contain the event and sterilize the source. Your infirmary is now the primary containment zone." He turned to 2 security guards who had been standing, frozen by the entrance. "Escort Dr. Reed back to the medical bay. He is to be confined there. The infirmary is now under a level 4 lockdown. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out." The guards hesitated, looking from Novak to me. I was the chief medical officer. They had brought me their own cuts and fevers for a year. "Now," Novak said. His voice didn't get louder, but it acquired a diamond-hard edge that stripped away all possibility of refusal. The guards flanked me, their faces apologetic, but their hands firm on my arms. "You can't do this, Novak," I snarled, trying to pull away. "You're treating the symptom, not the cause. You're locking away the only people who can help us understand what we're fighting." He turned back to the console, dismissing me as if I were a fly buzzing in the room. "The time for understanding is over, Doctor. The time for excision has begun." They marched me out of the control room, through the now silent, tense corridors. They walked me to the main doors of my own infirmary. "I'm sorry, Doc," one of them mumbled as the heavy doors shut, followed by the percussive thump of the magnetic locks engaging. I was a prisoner in my own clinic, with the most important patient in human history dying just a few yards away in a sealed room. Novak was wrong. The time for understanding had just begun. And if I had to tear a man's body apart on my autopsy table to find it, then that's exactly what I was going to do. The healer was gone. The investigator was all that was left. My world had been reduced to these walls, and the video feed from the BL4 suite on my main console. I watched the screen for hours. I watched Gary Walsh die. It wasn't a peaceful process. His vitals, displayed in green digits beside the video, became an erratic broadcast of a body tearing itself apart. His heart rate spiked and plummeted. His core temperature fluctuated by 10 degrees in as many seconds. Then his body went rigid. A single dark line of blood trickled from his nose. His vitals flatlined. All of them. Instantly. A massive, spontaneous cerebral hemorrhage. A temporal laceration, just as I'd theorized, had finally severed the connection between his mind and his body. The man was gone, but the evidence remained. Novak's order echoed in my mind. They're no longer personnel. They are hosts. To him, Gary's body was now just a piece of compromised biological material to be incinerated. To me, it was the key. It was the only place I might find an answer. Defying Novak was a necessity. I walked to the BL4 control panel and initiated the post-mortem sterilization sequence. UV radiation flooded the small room, followed by a chemical wash. Protocol. Then I typed in my override code, a 7-digit alphanumeric string that gave me, the CMO, final say over the disposition of remains. The thick steel door opened. The morgue was a small, cold room attached to the infirmary, containing 3 refrigerated lockers and a single stainless steel autopsy table. Moving Gary was a grim, solitary task. He was surprisingly light, as if the flickering had burned away some essential mass. As I laid him on the table, I felt a pang of profound guilt. I had given him a sedative for a problem that was eating his reality. I had failed him as a healer. Now, the only thing I could do for him was succeed as an investigator. I made the standard Y incision, the scalpel parting the skin on his chest with a wet zip. For an hour, I worked under the harsh glare of the overhead lamp. I examined every organ. The heart was undamaged. The lungs were clear. Everything was textbook normal. My frustration grew with every negative finding. There was no cause, no trace, no earthly reason for what had happened to him. It had to be in his brain. I performed the craniotomy, the small bone saw whining as it cut through his skull. With the utmost care, I lifted the calvarium and exposed the cerebrum. The hemorrhage was massive, a dark stain that had flooded the frontal lobe. A brutal injury, but it was the effect, not the cause. My eyes scanned the glistening, convoluted surface of the brain, searching for anything anomalous. On the surface of the left temporal lobe, nestled in the superior temporal gyrus, was a mark. It wasn't a contusion or a tumor. It was a flat, starburst-shaped lesion of matte, greyish-black tissue, no larger than a dime. It looked like it had been imprinted, a perfect geometric scar of unknown origin. I reached out with a surgical probe and touched its edge. It was rigid, dense as bone. I picked up a fresh scalpel, the blade a sliver of polished steel, and tried to excise a small sample. The blade scraped against the lesion's surface with a high-pitched, grating screech, the sound of metal on something far harder than flesh. Applying pressure, I finally managed to slice off a tiny, wafer-thin piece. I carried the sample to the digital microscope in the corner of the room. I placed it on the slide and focused the lens. The image bloomed onto the monitor, and the world fell away. There were no cells, no cell walls, no nuclei, no mitochondria. Nothing that I recognized as biology. Instead, the screen displayed a frozen geometric swarm of microscopic barbs. They didn't appear to be made of matter so much as an absence of it. Where the microscope's light struck them, it did not reflect. It simply stopped. What I was seeing wasn't a color, but a null field, a perfect cancellation of information that my brain could only interpret as pure black. It was an artifact. It was a piece of alien architecture woven directly into the fabric of a human brain. In that moment, everything snapped into a new, terrifying focus. This was the transponder. This was the projector that had flashed Gary's alternate deaths onto the screen of his own body. It was a physical foothold for the predator that was haunting us. I stumbled back from the monitor, my mind racing to give the horror a name, to force it into a box my intellect could handle. A sclerosis, an abnormal hardening of tissue, but this was caused by time itself. A chronal sclerosis nodule, a CSN. I finally knew. I knew what we were up against. Novak was trying to contain a ghost, but I had just found its corpse. I now had a target. A tangible, physical piece of the enemy. And if it could be cut, it could be killed. I turned my infirmary into a laboratory. I was sealed off, but I had access to some of the most advanced medical diagnostic tools on the planet. For the next several hours, I subjected the tiny, dark artifact to every test I could conceive. I exposed it to gamma radiation. It was inert. I subjected it to extreme cold. Its structure remained unchanged. But when I introduced a low-voltage electrical current, something happened. The microscopic barbs that made up its structure seemed to vibrate. The null field they produced, that absolute blackness, deepened for a fraction of a second, absorbing the current without a trace. It was feeding. It was an energy parasite. My eyes swept across my domain, searching for the next step, the next tool. They landed on the defibrillator mounted on the wall. A simple device. 2 paddles, a battery, and a capacitor that could deliver a massive, targeted electrical shock to reset the chaotic rhythm of a fibrillating heart. To force an arrhythmic system back into order. An arrhythmic system. A chaotic rhythm. The idea struck me. The CSN was a temporal arrhythmia. A knot in the rhythm of space-time, tied into the host's brain. What if it could be reset with a powerful, precisely focused burst of electromagnetic energy? A pulse that would shatter it. A defibrillator for reality itself. It was a monstrous, beautiful thought. I had the theory, but I couldn't build it. The device I was imagining would need a power source and a focusing array far beyond anything in my medical bay. I would need to modify a piece of heavy equipment, something like a portable MRI unit, and I didn't have the engineering knowledge, but I knew who did. Ben Carter, the practical man. The man who trusted physical evidence. The man who had seen Gary Walsh flicker between life and death and had the good sense to be horrified by it. I rushed to my main console. Novak would have the main comms locked down, but he couldn't sever every connection without shutting down the facility's core functions. There were redundancies, back channels for critical data. My terminal as Chief Medical Officer had priority clearance for transmitting medical files. It was a risk, a huge one. If Novak was monitoring me directly, this would be a signed confession of my defiance. I pulled up the personnel directory and found Carter's secure ID. I drafted a new message, classifying it as a Priority 1 medical data transfer. The subject line was clinical. Urgent biological analysis, for your eyes only. In the body, I was blunt and fast. Ben, I know what this is. It's a physical parasite, a biological artifact in the brain I'm calling a chronal sclerosis nodule. See attached file. That's what it looks like under a microscope. It's an energy-based organism. I have a theory, a targeted electromagnetic pulse, a massive one. I think it can destroy the nodules without killing the host. I can design the medical application, but I need you to build the delivery system. I think we can modify a portable imaging unit, but we have to move now. Novak has me locked in the infirmary. He plans to sterilize, not cure. If you're with me, find a way. Find me. Sam. I attached the image file. The terrifying picture of the frozen black swarm, my Exhibit A. I was betting my life, and the lives of everyone in this facility, on the hope that a practical engineer was more afraid of the monster than he was of the man with the rulebook. I hit send. The message vanished from my outbox. Now, there was only silence, and the agonizing wait to see if my desperate shot in the dark would be answered by an ally, or by Novak's guards kicking down my door. The silence in the infirmary stretched for an eternity. Then the facility-wide comm crackled to life. It was Novak. His tone was as flat as the walls around me, the sound of a pre-recorded announcement, even though I knew he was speaking live from the control room. Attention all Site 4 personnel. This is Supervisor Novak. As of 1800 hours, the ongoing biotemporal event has been classified as unrecoverable. My assessment, confirmed by the parameters of the Scythe protocol, is that the integrity of this facility has been terminally compromised. The risk of contagion beyond these walls is absolute and unacceptable. Therefore, the final stage of the protocol has been initiated. A sequenced, multi-stage sterilization process will commence immediately. The first stage will render all primary systems inoperable. The final stage will ensure the complete and total neutralization of all biological and temporal material within Site 4. The full process is irreversible. Site Command estimates that the protocol will be complete in 90 minutes. 90 minutes. My desperate plan, my theory, my hunt for a cure. It was all now compressed into a suicidal window of time. 90 minutes to devise a new form of physics, build a weapon, and deploy it. Then came the final cruel twist of the knife, a last piece of procedural malice. All non-essential personnel are advised to proceed in an orderly fashion to the designated Level 3 safe zone in sublevel Gamma. Novak's voice concluded. The sterilization sequence is automated. There will be no further communication. Novak out. The comm went dead. Sublevel Gamma. I pulled up the facility schematics on my console. I knew every level, every room. It didn't exist. There was no sublevel Gamma. There was no safe zone. It was a lie. A final piece of protocol designed to herd the doomed into a non-existent sanctuary, to keep them from panicking, to keep them from interfering with the orderly process of their own erasure. I slammed my fist on the console. The rage was hot and pure, a welcome fire against the encroaching ice of despair. My message to Carter felt like a lifetime ago. Had he even gotten it? Did he see it and decide it was madness? Or had Novak intercepted it? A soft hiss from the infirmary doors. I spun around. A thin green light appeared on the lock panel. Access granted. The heavy doors slid open with a smooth pneumatic sigh. Standing in the doorway was Ben Carter. In one hand he clutched a heavy-duty datapad. "I got your message." He took a step inside, and the doors slid shut behind him. "That picture, Jesus, Sam, is that real?" "Yes, it's inside all of them. Chen, Miller, anyone with the symptoms. It's a physical anchor." "And this pulse idea of yours?" The reality defibrillator. It's a long shot, Ben. A 1 in a million guess based on a half-dozen frantic tests. "Better odds than Novak is giving us," he said, a grim line forming on his lips. Okay, I can do it. Maybe. The theory is sound, electromagnetically speaking, but not with this stuff." He waved a hand at my delicate medical equipment. "We need industrial-grade capacitors, a focusing coil. We need the machine shop." "Novak has the facility on lockdown." "Novak has the people on lockdown," Carter corrected me, tapping his datapad. "He's using the primary command network. I'm a systems engineer, Sam. I built the back doors. I can get us there, but we have to move." We didn't need another word. We left the infirmary, stepping out into a corridor filled with surreal chaos. People wandered in a daze, some weeping, others simply staring into space, lost. A few were shuffling dutifully toward the lower levels, toward the non-existent salvation of sub-level Gamma. They were sheep being led to a slaughter they couldn't comprehend. We pushed past them, 2 men running against the tide of the doomed. The machine shop was a cavernous space smelling of hot metal. Carter slapped a heavy switch, and the room buzzed to life. "Lock the main door," he ordered. While I welded the main blast door shut, Carter was already tearing apart a mobile magnetic resonance scanner, a bulky machine used for industrial diagnostics. I brought him my datapad, showing him the energy absorption patterns of the CSN sample. "We need to create a pulse that's not just powerful, but complex," I explained, pointing at the screen. "A chaotic multi-frequency burst, something the node can't adapt to and absorb. It has to be overwhelmed. Like hitting it with every radio station at once." Carter grunted as he rerouted power cables. "I can do that. But the power drain, it'll cause a brownout across this whole sector." "Just tell me when," I said, scanning the schematics he'd pulled up. The 90-minute clock was a screaming siren in my head. 60 minutes left. As Carter jury-rigged a new heart for the machine, I fashioned 2 crude paddle-like applicators from copper plates and insulated wiring. A noise came from the corridor outside, a loud, rhythmic thump and scrape. It wasn't the sound of someone knocking. It was heavy, wet, and methodical. "What is that?" Carter asked. "The parasite," I said. "It knows." We both stopped, listening. Then came a voice, piped through the door's small intercom speaker. It was Arthur Coleman's voice, but twisted. "Let me in," it gurgled. A deep, circular dent blossomed in the center of the blast door, the sound a groaning shriek of stressed metal. Then another, right beside it. The impacts were metronomic, each blow landing with the same mechanical force. Carter scrambled to a nearby monitor, patching into the corridor's security camera. The image that appeared on the screen made the blood drain from my face. It was Coleman. He stood before our door. His head was canted sharply to one side, as if his neck was broken, yet his eyes were wide open and fixed on the door. One of his arms was bent backward at the elbow, the bone clearly shattered, yet he was using it as a battering ram, slamming it against the door again and again. His jaw was unhinged, hanging open, and from his mouth came not just his own mangled voice, but a chorus of whispering echoes. The parasite had turned Coleman, the arrogant physicist, into its puppet, a temporal lich sent to be its immune response. It was here to stop the cure. The steel blast door screamed, each impact from Coleman's broken body sending shudders through the floor. A spiderweb of fractures appeared around the central concave dent. Carter worked, sweat beading on his forehead, his face illuminated by the sparks from the wires he was splicing. 30 minutes left on Novak's clock, he said, and maybe 2 minutes until that thing gets through the door. Is it ready? I asked, my own hands working to secure the copper paddles to insulated handles. Almost. The capacitor bank is charged, but once I connect it, we have one shot. One, and we can't use it in here. He gestured wildly around the room. An uncontained pulse of this magnitude will flash cook every soft tissue in this room, us included. He was right. We needed a shield, a containment vessel. My eyes darted around the workshop, then to the facility schematic still displayed on a monitor. I traced the lines of the conduits, the concentric rings of the structure, all of them leading to one place, the center. The gate chamber, I said, the words coming out in a rush. Ben, it has to be the gate chamber. You told me what it was designed for, a containment field strong enough to hold a stabilized tear in space-time. If it can withstand that, it can withstand the pulse from this thing. Carter's head snapped up. Sam, no! Novak will be there. The Scythe protocol will be staged from the safest, most reinforced place in the facility. He'll have it sealed. He'll kill us on sight. He was right. But as he spoke, a cold, dark piece of memory floated to the surface of my mind. It was from a week after I arrived, during my initial review of the senior staff's medical files, Robert Novak's file. Most of it was redacted, but the basics were there. Height, weight, blood type, and medical alerts. Chronic histamine intolerance with severe anaphylactic response to specific protein chains. Patient carries a double dose of auto-injected epinephrine. Anaphylaxis. A biological shutdown. A switch you could flip if you knew the code. The pounding on the door intensified. A ragged tear appeared at the edge of the dent. The monster outside was getting through. Time was gone. Get it ready to move, I commanded. I'll handle Novak. I grabbed my emergency medkit from the floor where I'd dropped it. Inside, nestled among bandages and antiseptics, were 3 pre-filled syringes. One was a powerful stimulant. I palmed it. Carter, seeing the look on my face, didn't argue. With a final twist of a wrench, he mounted our monstrous device onto a heavy-duty pushcart. The thing looked less like a weapon and more like a bomb, a tangled nest of exposed wires and capacitors. The moment the door finally gave way, we were already moving, bursting out a side maintenance hatch and into a parallel corridor. Behind us, I heard the shriek of metal and the gurgling chorus of Coleman's stolen voice. We sprinted through the deserted hallways, the countdown clock ticking away in my head. We reached the final access corridor to the gate chamber. And there he was. Robert Novak stood before the massive circular portal leading into the central sphere, a tactical sidearm held steady in his hand. He was exactly as I pictured, calm, resolute, a man entirely at peace with the atrocity he was committing. That's far enough, Doctor. You are interfering with a federally mandated protocol. You are risking the future of the entire planet for the lives of a few dozen compromised individuals. They're not compromised, Novak. They're infected. We have a cure, I said, pushing the cart forward another few feet. It was a distraction. I needed to get closer. There is no cure for this, he said, raising the weapon to aim at my chest. There is only excision. Please, I begged, my voice cracking with feigned desperation. I let go of the cart and took a step forward, my hands raised in surrender. Just let me show you the data. Just look at it. I saw the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. He was a man of protocols, of data. The appeal to logic was his one weakness. He lowered the gun by a single critical inch. It was all the opening I needed. I darted forward, like a physician rushing to a patient. My left hand shot out and grabbed his jaw, snapping his head to the side, exposing the taut muscle and skin of his neck. My right hand, holding the syringe, came up. For a fraction of a second, the healer in me screamed. This was a violation of everything I was, my most sacred oath. Primum non nocere. First, do no harm. But the healer was dead. I located the carotid artery by instinct. I drove the needle home, depressing the plunger in a single smooth motion. Novak's eyes went wide with shock. He gasped, a wet, strangled sound. The gun clattered to the floor. His own body's defenses, hyper-activated by the stimulant, turned on him. His face began to swell, his airways constricting. He clawed at his throat, collapsing to his knees, his body already starved of oxygen. I didn't watch him fall. I turned back to Carter. "Open the door." Ben complied. The massive portal to the gate chamber slid open. We pushed the device inside, into the heart of the vast spherical room. In the center, the apparatus of Project Echo Point hung suspended in a web of conduits. With 15 minutes left on the clock, we aimed the paddles at the core of the chamber. "Do it," I said. Carter slammed a heavy red button. There was no sound, no cinematic roar. There was only a profound and absolute negation. A wave of pure cancellation expanded from the copper paddles, an invisible shock wave of nothing. It wasn't light or dark. It was an expanding sphere of informational void. The air grew instantly, painfully cold. The very fabric of the room seemed to stretch thin, and a deep, gut-wrenching pressure built in my sinuses, as if I were plunging to the bottom of the deepest ocean. I felt something tear loose inside my head, the snapping of a tether that had been pulling at me since Gary Walsh first walked into my infirmary. The wave hit the far walls of the chamber and dissipated. The pressure vanished. The air rushed back into my lungs with a ragged gasp. Carter stumbled back from the device, his face slack with shock, and collapsed against the wall, vomiting onto the pristine floor. Total quiet descended. It was the silence of a house after a fever breaks, the silence of a predator having left the hunting ground. We had won. We were alive. My eyes fell on Novak's body, crumpled near the entrance. Then I looked down at my own hands. The empty syringe was still clutched in my fist. I had saved us. But I had done it by weaponizing my oath. The knowledge that had been my shield, my purpose, my entire identity, I had turned it into a poison. I had looked at a man, diagnosed his specific vulnerability, and used it to bring him down with all the cold precision of a sniper. And in the ringing, absolute silence of our victory, the echo of that single monstrous choice was the only sound I could hear. They came 3 days later, a salvage crew. They wore sterile white hazmat suits and carried devices that weren't designed to detect life, but to scrub data. They found Carter and me in the mess hall, sitting in silence amidst the wreckage of our former lives. The debriefing took place in a windowless room that was probably once a storage closet. The men across the table were not military. They were faceless administrators in dark suits, the kind of men who managed budgets for apocalypses. They spoke of a catastrophic reactor leak and a tragic loss of life. They presented us with a story, polished and plausible, and a mountain of paper that signed away our pasts. Carter took the deal. A new identity, a pension that would make him a king, and the promise of a quiet life, provided that life remained quiet. I saw him one last time as they led him away. He wouldn't meet my eye. He just wanted to forget. I don't blame him. Some men are built to survive and move on. I was not. They didn't know what to do with me. I was not a simple engineer who could be relocated. I was a physician who had diagnosed a monster and documented its biology. I was the author of the report they were trying to bury. So they gave me a different kind of life. They call it indefinite convalescence. I live in a pristine apartment on the 27th floor of a building that doesn't officially exist. There are no locks on the doors, but I know I can never leave. My bank account contains more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I have everything a man could want, except a past I can speak of and a future I can choose. I don't practice medicine anymore. I can't. Sometimes I look at my hands, the same hands that once set bones and sutured wounds, and I see them differently now. I see them as tools that know how to find a vulnerability and exploit it. The healer is dead, and the investigator has nothing left to investigate. The nightmares are not what you'd expect. I don't dream of flickering bodies or monsters. I dream of order. I dream I'm back in my infirmary, methodically cleaning my instruments, arranging them in perfect rows. I dream of a world that makes sense. I spend my days watching the city below. I watch the people moving like blood cells through the arteries of the streets. They live in a world of predictable, observable facts. A fever is a temperature. A wound has a cause. Their universe is a complex but ultimately logical system. They have no idea how thin that logic is, how fragile the wall that separates their ordered reality from the silent, hungry chaos that lies just beyond it. They don't know how lucky they are. Sometimes, for no reason at all, I will clench my right hand, and I can almost feel it. The smooth glass of a syringe. The memory of the weight of it, the perfect balance in my palm, the phantom sensation of the plunger depressing under the pressure of my thumb. It's a feeling that will never leave me. It is my only souvenir from Site 4. It is my scar, my own personal temporal anomaly, the single point in time where I ceased to be one thing and became another. A doctor's first promise, the bedrock of my entire existence, was always so simple. Primum non nocere. First, do no harm. What a beautiful lie.